My name is Spencer Baucke, and I'm a principal consultant and data viz lead of our Power BI practice at Tessellation Consulting. We're a boutique consulting firm based out of Minneapolis. I'll get to our business more here in just a second, but first I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the people that invited me to speak here today. I actually got my start in analytics here at the University of Cincinnati Center for Business Analytics. I actually got my master's in finance from the Lindner College of Business, but it didn't take me too terribly long to figure out that I wasn't that great at finance and I wasn't that interested in it either. So if there's a reason to make a career switch, I'd imagine that was as good a case as I could have made. So my last semester of grad school, I took a intro to R class where I was like, I should have been doing this stuff the entire time. I loved it. I fell in love with data analytics. So then after attending a 2-day training class from a Tableau Zen master, Jeff Schaefer, I was just hook, line, and sinker, and I knew this is what I wanted to do for work. So as they say, the rest is history. So big thank you to UC. So, as I mentioned, I didn't do finance anymore. I left banking. I left and went to the city of Cincinnati, where I got to work in Tableau a lot. And we actually helped launch a Tableau public-based portal called Cincy Insights. It's still there today if you want to go check out some of the awesome visualizations that they have with data about all aspects of the city of Cincinnati available to you. So from there, I went to GE, where I worked in both GE Capital and GE Digital, doing a variety of analyst and solution architecture roles, including using tools such as Spotfire, OBIE, which we're not going to cover today, but is part of that ever-changing landscape that Glenn alluded to. Worked with Tableau a little bit, and then our good friend Excel. But all that led me to where I'm at today, and that's Tessellation. So at Tessellation, we have two sides of our business. One is a traditional time and materials consulting where we deliver anything from data science, data architecture solutions, data viz, and dashboards that you would expect from a BI consulting. The other half of our business is called Data Coach. And Data Coach is an enterprise enablement program where we stand up teams and enterprises using tools such as Tableau, Power BI. We also have courses in Alteryx and data fluency. You can check out more information on all those services at datacoach.com. So the reason we're talking about what we're talking about today, Tableau and Power BI, comes down to one word. It's relevance. I think one of the great things as I'm sitting here listening to the other amazing presenters is that we're all talking about things that we're all talking about, right? That we hear in our workplaces and that we see every day. And so that's why we're talking about this. And with my consulting role, I've been in a number of companies the past few years to know that this conversation has come up in just about every single place I've ever worked at. And now, whether that's specifically Tableau and Power BI, a few years ago, maybe the tools are different, but today it certainly is Tableau and Power BI involved in those conversations. So let's talk about it. So you could think of today as a no holds barred WWE grudge match between these two platforms. But I'm just kidding. That's not what we're here to do, right? It's not John Cena and The Rock fighting it out. We want to actually come to a mutual understanding of what are both good at and how can we leverage both to achieve our goals. So here are our goals for today. Understand why these two tools, what are their pros and cons? What are they both good at? Where is there some, things missing? I'm going to bring up some specific use cases that I've seen both in previous roles and with clients at my current role at Tessellation and show you those use cases. And then we're going to explore how to find the right tool for you and your team and or organization. So in this slide, we are looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And before everyone starts chucking virtual tomatoes at me, I want to preface this by saying we always have to take these type of rankings, top 5 lists, what have you, with a grain of salt. For example, we have to note the Magic Quadrant, Gartner is comparing Microsoft and Tableau, not Power BI specifically. So they're including a lot of the Power Platform and other Microsoft tools in there. And then how they grade these tools continues to change and evolve from year to year. This year, they weighted more heavily for AI and machine learning capabilities. So, you know, the grading isn't that consistent. There's obviously some motivations in here. So all that being said, I'm using this as a platform to talk about why these two tools. And what I mean by that is that Tableau and Power BI have been in the leaders quadrant and continue to maintain a big lead according to these rankings. And again, take them for what you will. But you know, these rankings probably mean a little more than Tableau people want you to think. And it probably means a little bit less than Power BI people want you to think. But either way, today in 2021, you know, Microsoft has established itself as a leader. And you know, if you're a big fan of Tableau and can't ever see your organization or you using Power BI, well, it's either Tableau 1 and Power BI 2 or vice versa. So that's why we're here talking about these two tools. So the last slide I showed you is the latest rankings. That's where we're at now. But if we are to evaluate these BI tools, we're going to want to evaluate them over the next 3 to 5 years or however long that we're planning to keep these tools implemented at our organizations. So the biggest factor facing Tableau that honestly hasn't worked itself out yet or shown what the end result will look like is the acquisition by Salesforce. Now that Tableau is under the Salesforce umbrella, we have to look at Salesforce to project Tableau's position as well, because it's obviously going to have a big effect on the software. Excuse me, one moment. So one of the other big headlines that we've seen with Salesforce is that they recently agreed to acquire Slack. And for those familiar with Power BI and how Power BI is so powerful integrating with Teams, you know, perhaps there's a similar sharing capability there down the road. Again, Salesforce effect on Tableau. It's probably the biggest unanswered question for me at this point. I have opinions on how it's gone and how I see it, but there's nothing definitive, so I'm going to keep those opinions to myself for now. Power BI, on the other hand, seems to be giving users meaningful updates at a very blistering pace. So their monthly releases are often full of, you know, new items such as composite modeling, and most recently, premium per user pricing, Charticulator, which is something we'll dive into here in a second, just got released as standard in the App Store. And I've also seen inquiries about Power BI increasing tremendously the past couple of years. And that's just speaking from my experience. You know, I don't have all of the data in front of you, which is probably not good for a conference like this, but I can tell you from personal experience that the amount of inquiries that I've gotten about either transitioning to Power BI or starting up a Power BI instance have increased exponentially the past few years. So now that we understand why we're talking about these two tools, let's look at some of the pros and cons of each tool. So I just want to preface this by saying a majority of the use cases that I see with clients are possible in both Tableau and Power BI. And maybe there are some that are more conducive or it's, you know, that can be achieved a lot faster in one or the other. But when it comes to the first pro I have listed here, geospatial analytics or mapping or anything like that, Tableau is hands down a leader. Between new features such as buffer calculations and map layers and it's very easy integrations with Mapbox. If you want to do geospatial analytics, you want Tableau. If you need to replicate exact visualizations, or you want more creative room for your developers and your visual solutions, and Tableau offers you nearly unlimited customization of your solutions, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But long story short, you build visualizations in Tableau using an X and Y axis. So the ability to manipulate your charts is just about infinite. The last pro that really stands out for me with Tableau is the community. And unlike Power BI, Tableau's community, or the data fam, I know that's more encompassing than just Tableau, but Tableau's community seems to be very active under the data fam hashtag on Twitter and LinkedIn, is very concentrated. And so it's very easy to find and get connected with. And although Power BI has a community, it is much more disparate, in my opinion, hard to get involved with. And I'm saying that as someone who helps run a Power BI community initiative. So having been involved or being involved with both of them, I know that Tableau's community is extremely helpful in getting started. So now let's switch over to the pros for Power BI. One of the biggest pros that I've heard from my clients is that Power BI is priced very affordably, and that's going to be a constant theme in this presentation, and we'll dive into the pricing more in depth here in a second. But at a high level, there's no way to get around it. Power BI pricing is extremely attractive. And one of the reasons they can do this is the fact that they're a Microsoft product, right? They have Microsoft money, and they have that infrastructure already built in where they can integrate with tools such as Azure and Teams seamlessly, and it's a very easy process to get started. And lastly, the Power BI equivalent, I would say, in terms of what tool has a huge gap on the other, Power BI equivalent of Tableau's mapping is its data modeling. Now, Power BI's relational modeling capabilities has been strong for years. Multiple fact tables, very simple. They recently enabled composite models, allowing you to use the direct query method amongst different data sources. It used to be, if you're going direct query, you can only pull and query tables from one data source. That has recently changed. And then Power BI makes your data transformations and cleansing extremely simple using Power Query. And I should add that Power Query is native to Power BI desktop, unlike Tableau Prep is to Tableau desktop. I will touch more on that here in a second. But those are the overall pros of each tool. So let's talk about some cons. So for Tableau, price is going to continue to be a challenge as Microsoft continues to be able to price their tools a little bit more efficiently. And also Tableau is trying to get a lot of their users pushed to their subscription model. So a lot of the times this is going to be more expensive than core pricing, especially for enterprise clients with large user groups and development bases. So that subscription model is also somewhat inefficient. So in order to get certain features in the subscription models, such as Tableau Prep Conductor, that allows Tableau Prep flows to run on your server, you're going to need to add on $3 per month per user. And as we'll cover in just a second, that add-on fee is not just for whoever's using it. That add-on needs to be applied to every license as well. Regardless of whether that feature is used, it's going to be added on to every license, per month. That's just one example of Tableau's pricing challenges. But like I said, we have a whole nother slide to dive into this a little deeper in a second. Now, Tableau did just release relationships that allows for more relational data modeling capabilities, but they are still very limited compared to Power BI. So now there is some capability to do multi-fact table data modeling, but there's a limit on how many dimension tables you can have in your data model, so on and so forth. And lastly, it's something we've touched on, but Salesforce's focus on Tableau has been, let's just say, a bit less than I would have expected. Again, it's not something I can quantify, but it's something to keep in mind as we see how Salesforce's acquisition of Tableau continues. Power BI's cons are pretty straightforward. Their visuals are limited. Anyone who uses the tool and has used Tableau or Power BI will tell you the visual aspect is limited. Now, there is a custom Viz store where Microsoft has added in custom visualizations, but even those are fairly limited. Just the way that Power BI builds their chart elements is limiting. So unless that framework is changed, I think that con is going to be an ongoing issue. There are some things such as Charticulator that I'm going to touch on that have been released recently that could change that. And if you're unfamiliar, Charticulator is a custom visualization tool or chart type within Power BI that allows users to alter very specific aspects of the visuals being presented. So if you do have Power BI at your workspace, I highly suggest you check that out if you're searching for more variation with your development. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the pros and cons of Tableau and Power BI, I'm going to look into some more specific use cases. And in order to look at these use cases, I want to think about them in 3 different lenses, right? Because there's different pieces of the business, there's different users, they're using these tools for different reasons. So it's only natural that we go over some use cases looking through these different lenses. So these 3 lenses are going to be a developer, so someone building reports, an admin, so someone who is in charge of the process of promotion and adminning either Tableau server or Power BI workspace, and then the executive, somebody who's making decisions either based on this data or someone who's interested in what tool their organization ends up using. So we're going to look through these 3 lenses. So this slide is pretty basic, but our first specific use case is, it's less of a use case and more of a direct comparison on how one would build a chart in Tableau or Power BI. So you can see on the right is Power BI. And if you look in the bottom right, there are open boxes that say add field here. And so in order to populate a chart in Power BI, you have to populate those fields with data. Now you don't have to populate all of them, but you have to populate a certain amount of them for a visualization to show up. So this can limit the creativity of your developers. On the left-hand side, you have Tableau. At the top are a couple empty panes labeled columns and rows. And then you can also see a marks card here, middle left of your screen. You can populate any of those areas with any of the fields within your data model. And so you can really make, just the setup of Tableau really makes creating the exact visualization you want possible. Whereas it's really not that possible to create anything you'd like in Power BI. So I like to think of Power BI more as like a coloring book where, the outlines are set for you. You got to color in the middle, and then Tableau is more just a blank page. You just get to, go for it. Our second use case is drill throughs. This is a very commonly requested functionality of any solution because people want to see analysis and they want to see visuals at different levels of granularity. So there are some ways to do this in Tableau, but the level of skill needed to accomplish it is relatively high. So you can see on the left, we're going to start on the left with Tableau. In order to create a table where your first column is your level of granularity, so we'll just, as an example, say region. To be able to click on that region and then see information about the states that align to said region is going to need you to create some custom calculations. You're going to need to be able to arrange the calculations on your canvas appropriately. And lastly, you're going to have to be able to set up the appropriate set actions. And again, if you know Tableau, I'm talking in your language right now, you need to be able to set up your set actions or your parameter actions, whatever kind of dashboard action you're setting up, you'll need to be able to do that in order to create this sort of visual. So there's some lifting that needs to be done to do this. To create a similar kind of drop-down functionality in Power BI is very simple. for those familiar with the tool, all you need to do is create a matrix and then drag your first level hierarchy to your rows and then your second level hierarchy to your rows. And it enables a little click down option for you, much like a pivot table in Excel. So if you want to create a drill where you can just move from one level of granularity to another on another page, right? You can populate the drill through filter as well. So we don't just have to have this drill through on the same page. If you want to drill from one page to another page, so let's say our first view is region and our second view is state. If you want to drill through and immediately have your second view of data pre-filtered for a specified region, you can do that via the drill through function within Power BI. So sorting through these levels of granularity essentially is very easy and out of the box in Power BI. Our third use case here is mapping. So as I mentioned previously, mapping is a huge strength of Tableau's. At the top of my slide here in the top left is a anonymized version and not entirely built out, but it's just an example of a work that I did for a client tracking shipping locations on the ocean. So the level of flexibility that Tableau allowed me to accomplish something like this was relatively easy. And then in the bottom left, you can see some of the crazy cool examples of mapping that are being done. In this case, this is a dashboard by Christian Felix that won Tableau's Iron Viz competition, and for good reason. Although this isn't a business use case, this shows some of the extreme flexibility that one has while developing in the tool, specifically with mapping. Tableau also released map layers in version 2020.4 that allows developers to place layers of geospatial data on top of one each other on a map. In previous versions, if you haven't opened the 2020.4 version yet, instead of having to do a dual access or some other trickery to get multiple layers on a map to show, now you can add about as many layers that you want over your map. So that's a really useful thing that Tableau recently released. So while Power BI mapping capabilities have increased, I don't want to say that they are nothing, because they're not. The screenshot to the right, it may not be the best that Power BI has to offer, but there's not much competition in this category, having used both for several years now. So if you need to do anything more than plotting Latin longe, coloring states, maybe coloring cities that are plotted on your map, you'll want to consider Tableau. Okay, so now let's talk about interaction with the end product. So anytime you build a product, your users are going to interact with it, and providing them some flexibility in interacting with those solutions is really key. So both platforms have interaction capabilities, but they differ on what they can do. So Power BI enables users to filter visuals by clicking on chart elements, as well as highlighting elements on a report canvas. You can also include slicers, which are, they're just filters that are chart elements to include on the report canvas. So, it's like a drop-down filter or a list filter that you can include on your report canvas to allow for filtering that way. In the slicer pane, the filter pane, not slicer pane, the filter pane is always available on the right-hand side in Power BI service. I'll show you, actually you can see on the slide in the bottom right. If you look to the far right, there is a pane called filter, and those filters you can set in desktop before you publish the service. So you're able to save report real estate, not always have slicers taking up space on your report. If you want certain filters available to your end user, you can always include those in the filter pane when you publish. And again, as I mentioned, drill throughs are another great way for users to interact and filter data down to their specific view. So even with all of Power BI's great filtering capabilities, and they are good, in my opinion, Tableau has a little more in this category. So whether it is click filters, highlight actions, changing set actions. So what you can do in Tableau is click on certain values in your dashboard, and it affects the whether or not those values are in or out of your set. So you can compare whether, you can compare the values that you're clicking on versus the values that are out of the set or to another group of data. It's really useful when trying to make a dashboard really customizable. You're also allowed to change parameters dynamically. For Power BI users, it's a little different of a definition where you can set those parameters in Power Query, but in Tableau, you're able to parameterize a number of different fields. And now by clicking on your dashboard, you're able to change through those parameters dynamically. So that is a really, really useful tool for enabling users to interact with the dashboard how they want. So while I think Tableau is a little more flexible in this area, Power BI's filter pane and drill through capabilities should not be understated because they are very, very useful. All right, so our next use case is a comparison scenario comparing the data modeling of the two. And this is really where Power BI takes the cake. I often hear that people say that Power BI is meant for the data architect, while Tableau is meant for the analyst. And while there's some exceptions to that rule, I generally agree. So Power Query is such an incredibly powerful tool, and it's part of the Power BI desktop platform. So for Tableau users, it would be like having Tableau Prep pop up when the data source view of Tableau Desktop appeared, and having all that functionality to do your data cleansing and transformation right there. So you're able to do some basic transformations, such as group bys, text parsing, trimming, as well as more complicated stuff like calculated columns, custom functions. There's also a fun web scraping functionality that's cool to play with. But the best part of these transformations is that they are all part of your final data model. So when you schedule refreshes in Power BI service, your data is going to go through these steps every time in Power Query. And when your data model is loaded to desktop, those things go with it. It's not an add-on like it currently is with Tableau. Yeah, so currently, Tableau doesn't have anything close to this functionality built in. Now, we'll dive into that in a second. So Tableau does have Tableau Prep, right? And while there's some debate as to whether Tableau Prep is a good tool, I'm not going to wade into those waters. What I will say is that Tableau Prep does come free with your creator license. But in order to schedule flows to run on your server, on Tableau server, you're still going to need that add-on Tableau Prep Conductor. So in my opinion, Tableau Prep, without the ability to depend on it consistently, without that add-on price, it doesn't compare to what Power Query gives you as part of Power BI Desktop natively, especially given the criticism, some of the criticism over the quality of the tool. So if you're planning on needing any big ETL work at the team level, so not necessarily at the enterprise data management level, then you'll definitely appreciate the capabilities that Power Query will give you and your team. Okay, so last but not least for the developer use cases, the community support. So I'm a product of the Tableau community, so I'm slightly biased, and it's acknowledged, I think amongst other analytics communities, that Tableau's community is pretty unique. So whether it's the forums, people answering at all times of night, or Tableau Public and the work that they put on, it's just amazing, the support that you can receive. So if you haven't already, I'd look at Tableau Public if you're looking for inspiration or looking about visualizations about a topic that might interest you. So Microsoft does have something similar for Power BI called the Data Stories Gallery, but a lot of the same functionalities, such as like personal profiles, make it a little underwhelming. And additionally, to connect, like I mentioned earlier, to connect with the Power BI community, you have to do a little bit more digging, and it is a little more disparate. There is an active Power BI subreddit. There are some folks on Twitter, and then there's some more on LinkedIn as well. And so although this is not a tangible piece of the product, right, this community support shouldn't be underestimated, especially when trying to grow and develop your team. So this Next use case is from the lens of an admin. So in terms of being an admin on either Power BI service or Tableau server, there's probably more similarities than there are differences, but a workspace in Power BI is called a site or even a project in Tableau. Some of that granularity can get wishy-washy, but using Active Directory groups for workspaces or project site access is still the most efficient way to manage access, and then row-level security is enabled in both. Although personally, I do find the way that Power BI implements it in desktop to be a little bit more straightforward or intuitive, I guess I would say, than Tableau's. That's just my personal preference. One really cool feature that I highlight here on the right-hand side of my slide is deployment pipelines in Power BI service. And so you will be able to have deployment pipelines if you're either your workspace admin and either a pro user and belong to an organization that has premium capacity, or you have the premium per user licensing that just came out. So deployment pipelines allow admins a really nice user interface to help promote reports and data sets through your production lifecycle. So from dev, QA to prod, it's a really nice interface to be able to tell where each data set or report is in the process, and then be able to promote those reports and data sets very easily. So additionally, Power BI service has a concept of an app it's basically a wrapper for all of your reports in a workspace. And this allows for an app to have a constant link for end users. Well, if there's any Power BI admins in the group, you'll know that every time that you're updating or deploying these new reports through the pipelines, that sometimes the links can change. And so if you send out a link, they won't have a place to go, but you can always direct them to the same link that is the wrapper, AKA the Workspace app. All right, so now the fun part, pricing. So let's go over some basics for how each product is structured. So for Power BI, there's a couple of components that you need to be aware of, and that's your Power BI Pro licenses and your Power BI Premium capacity. So you don't always have premium capacity. If you're in a large organization, it's highly recommended. As we've mentioned, you can see here that Power BI licenses start at $9.99 a month per user. And on the premium per month licensing is $20 a month. Now we can compare that directly to our Tableau licenses. For a viewer, it's $12 a month. And then for the more, the more capable license, a creator, that's $70 per month per user. And then there are some comparisons that I put here with the premium licensing. So this is going to be, how many cores that you have, and some refresh capabilities. It increases as you go up the SKU numbers. And one more thing to mention here is that Tableau has been recently pushing its customers to adopt a subscription-based modeling, and I think I saw somewhere, and don't quote me, this might have changed, that May 2021, so this month, was actually the goal for them to move all new customers over to their subscription model. So for large organizations, that can be a lot more expensive. So, just a lot of your pricing, there's a lot of variables, but a lot of your pricing is going to depend on how many cores you need, how many users you're going to have. And then, so speaking of cores, just real quick, if you do have core pricing and you're looking to switch to Power BI, it's an estimated, and this is an estimate, it's not a rule, so it's an estimated 1.5 Power BI cores per Tableau core that you have. So just keep that in mind. That's just an informal poll that we've had over clients that have transitioned. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but it is something to keep in mind what that translation would look like. All right, so let's just switch gears for a second. Yes, that's a matrix reference. So if you did have to choose one or the other, let's look at some of the factors that that you should consider. So one is your requirement needs, what leadership desires, right? what talent do you already have on board? What are your source systems and integrations? And then your existing infrastructure. And let me dive into each just really quick because I know that we are coming up on time here. So when I talk about existing infrastructure, what tools do you already have in your toolkit? Are you already using Tableau? That's going to make a difference on what tool you pick to go forward, because obviously transitioning can be an expensive venture. Do you have a lot of money already invested in your current infrastructure? That's something you need to talk about. Are you already deep into standing up Power BI or what have you at your organization? That's definitely going to make an impact on which direction that you go. And why is that? Because your source systems and integrations are very important to consider as well. Certain tools integrate with certain source systems and platforms, such as Microsoft Power BI obviously integrates well with the Microsoft platform. It's part of the Microsoft platform. So if you are a 365 shop, the integration is pretty seamless, especially if you're using Azure a lot. If you use Salesforce a lot, well, Tableau is owned by Salesforce now. They're working on a lot of those integrations. So there's just a lot of things at play here. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of variables, but here's some to just keep in mind. One that I don't think people talk a lot about is your talent that you have now. If you're going to switch, it's going to take time, it's going to take money, and a lot of times you need to bring in people that have skills and or knowledge of the tool already to A, teach your team, or B, join them. Both of those cost money. So those are things to keep in mind when switching. If your team already has a lot of people that do both, then this is going to be less of an impact on your budget. We talked a lot about this in our pros and cons, so I'll go through this one quickly. What are your requirement needs? Do you have specific needs in terms of custom charts or visuals? Do you need that mapping? Do you have a lot of ETL needs at the developer or team level? And then are your stakeholders used to using one tool and they're really, really adamant about using that tool? If they are, maybe that's something you should consider, because what are we here to do at the end of the day is to drive insight and, make sure our stakeholders are happy. And then this is kind of the wild card, right? Is what does your leadership have a preference? Sometimes leaders have preferences in terms of where they're going. A lot of that is driven by budget, and that's something we touched on earlier. And then are there existing contracts in place that you're not aware of? So do you already have a contract set up with a tool that you're going to pay for anyway? We don't want to be paying for tools we're not using, so that's something to consider as well. Lastly, you need to do what's right for you. You need to weigh all the options. You need to figure out the best solution for you and weigh those against each other and make that decision from there. This is kind of not a joke slide, but something that I kind of use to sum up the two tools. You want a Honda or Mercedes. They both get you there. One gets you there a little bit more efficiently, may not look as cool, it may not have all the gizmos, and the other one gets you there for a premium and you look way cooler along the way. I will close with this. People ask me all the time, what tool do I prefer? And my go-to response is, well, neither Tableau or Microsoft pays my salary, so I don't really care. It's whatever gets my job done best. So my experience is a lot of the organizations I've worked with have both tools. So it's most of the time, it's not a one or the other conversation. It's finding the best tool for you. So that's what I have today. I know we're up against time. Thank you again for having me. You can feel free to connect with me. I'm very active on Twitter. I also have a website that I blog on often, and I publish work to Tableau Public on a frequent basis. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like.